52 years ago, a 19-year-old college student in Prescott, Arizona, vanished after a gathering with friends by Watson Lake, leaving no trace except for a silver car that was never found. Authorities concluded it was a drowning, and the lead investigator, Sheriff Roy Whitaker, was praised for swiftly resolving the case. However, for decades, the girl's family never accepted that conclusion, quietly searching and clinging to the faint hope that one day the truth would surface. Then, during a highway expansion excavation in 2020, workers stumbled upon a car buried deep under red dirt, triggering a chain of events that stunned the Arizona community. Before we dive into this shocking case, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love stories unearthed from the past, don't forget to hit subscribe to catch our next video. Prescott sits nestled among the rocky hills of northern Arizona, where red dirt roads stretch toward the desert horizon, and Watson Lake lies still, like a mirror reflecting the summer moonlight. The town back then was small, quiet, with a few rows of wooden houses, an old gas station, and a roadside diner, always playing country music through a crackling radio. In a house on the south edge of town, Emily Sanders, just 19, a freshman at Arizona State University, was home for the summer. She was an only daughter, reserved, private, rarely one for parties. But that evening, her best friend convinced her to join a small summer farewell gathering with old friends by the lake. On the water's edge, car headlights cast flickering beams across the lake. Rock music blared from a portable radio, and the smell of cheap beer and cigarette smoke mingled with dry grass. Emily sat slightly apart by the shore, smiling faintly at someone's story, holding an unopened can of beer. Around midnight, the wind picked up, the music faded, and the group began packing up. Emily said she'd head home early to help her mom at the shop the next day. A few friends teased her, saying, "Don't drive too fast on that dirt road." She just smiled, slipped on a thin jacket, climbed into her silver Ford Galaxy, and started the engine. The headlights cut through the red dust as the car backed out of the lot and drove along the lake road, disappearing into the vast darkness of the hills. No one in the group thought much of it. The next morning, the Sanders house was unusually quiet. Emily's bedroom door was open, her bed untouched, the landline silent. On her dresser, the familiar silver necklace was gone. Helen, her mother, thought she might be at a friend's, but by noon, there was still no sign of her. George, her father, drove around town, stopping by Watson Lake. The lot was empty, with only faint tire tracks in the damp sand, the desert wind scattering small clouds of dust across the road. When he returned, he said nothing, only looked at his wife and picked up the phone. Helen spoke first, her voice trembling, slow and low. "I want to report my daughter's been missing since last night." On the other end, the operator confirmed they'd connect her to the police. Outside the window, the midday sun blazed, the light so white it seemed to melt the road. Less than an hour later, as the sun tilted westward, the sound of a police car engine rumbled from the dirt road. A white sedan with the Prescott PD emblem pulled up to the Sanders porch, its tires coated in red dust. A young officer carried a missing person report form, his voice gentle but firm as he questioned Helen about the previous night. Both parents recounted every detail: the lake party, the silver Ford Galaxy, the promise to be home early. As the mother fought back tears, the officer nodded, saying they'd start searching around the lake. When he left, the front door closed, leaving a heavy silence in the house. In 1973, Prescott, the police force was small and poorly equipped. The search relied on what was available: paper maps, radios, flashlights, and human eyes. 12 officers, 2 K-9 units, and nearly 20 volunteers fanned out across the dirt roads leading to Watson Lake. They walked along the shore, shone lights into muddy patches, called the girl's name into the wind, hoping for an echo. A County Bell 47 helicopter circled the lake, its spotlight sweeping the flat water, reflecting like thousands of glass shards. No car tracks, no skid marks, no metal fragments. Everything was eerily clean, as if the silver car had never existed. 3 days later, rain arrived, water pouring down the hills, washing away what little remained. By the fourth day, only mud, rotting leaves, and overlapping boot prints were left. One morning, Officer Joe Tanner, walking along the lake's edge, caught a glint in the grass under the early sunlight. He bent down and picked it up, a silver necklace, thin chain, with a leaf-shaped clasp. He slipped it into a nylon bag, marked the spot, and brought it to the station. When Helen saw it, she recognized it instantly. It was the necklace Emily wore daily. No blood, no scratches, the chain intact. Sheriff Roy Whitaker made a brief note in the report. Possible belonging to victim. He placed the brown envelope with the evidence in a drawer and locked it. Beyond that, nothing. Another team searched the oak forest west of the lake, where the soil was soft and prone to sinking, but found no tire tracks or signs of a crash. They checked the steep roadside, where gravel collected, but the rain had erased any trails. Sheriff Whitaker stood on a slope, squinting at the misty lake. He was experienced, but even his instincts offered no clues. On the seventh night, a meeting was held in the cramped police station room. Exhausted deputies, clothes caked in mud, reported on each searched area. No one had anything new. Finally, Whitaker spoke, his voice hoarse. No signs of violence, no crime scene, no witnesses to an accident. She may have left Prescott on her own. The words sank the room into silence. Someone glanced at another, then looked down. Outside, rain fell again, pattering steadily on the tin roof. At the north end of town, the Sanders house went dark early. Helen sat in a chair, still holding her daughter's framed photo. George paced the porch, listening to distant thunder. Beneath Watson Lake, the water was murky and deep, lightning flashing silver across its surface. Everyone in town assumed the search would soon end, that perhaps the young girl had started a new journey, somewhere far quieter. But the next morning, the local paper ran Emily's photo on the front page. Bold text reading, "Missing student, last seen at Watson Lake." No one could have known that photo would linger longer than the lives of many in the initial search party. By the second week, as hope thinned like morning fog over Watson Lake, the search expanded beyond town limits. Highway 89A, winding through dry hills and red rock toward the south, became the most likely route Emily might have taken. 2 police cars, a small rescue truck, and a few volunteers spread out along the road. They stopped at every gas station, asking attendants if they recalled a silver Ford Galaxy or a blonde girl filling up that Saturday night. Everyone shook their heads. Some said it was a busy night, others swore no strangers stopped by. In an area with few passers-by, a young girl driving alone at midnight would have stood out, but no one remembered. They moved on to roadside diners, places smelling of burnt coffee and lit by dim neon, where long-haul truckers rested. No staff recalled a girl like that. Some mentioned seeing the missing person report in the paper, but none had specific information. The further they went, the more Roy Whitaker felt every trace had been erased before they started. The police had no radio logs or phone data to trace. All they had were stories, memories, and gut feelings. In town, rumors began to spread. Some said Emily was kidnapped, others claimed she ran off with someone. A woman living near the lake road said she heard an engine and saw car lights flash through her window that night, then silence. When questioned, she couldn't recall the vehicle, only saying, "It sounded deep heavy." She thought it might have been a truck. Her statement was noted, then filed into the growing case folder. 3 days later, another witness emerged. Daniel Ricks, Emily's old classmate who'd been at the party. He swore that as he left the lake, he saw a police car parked near the lot, headlights off, the driver inside. "I'm sure of it," he said. "I thought it was a Prescott patrol car, but I don't know why it was parked there, near the woods, not the main road." Whitaker listened, paused for a few seconds, then replied, "That was one of ours." An officer on night shift stopped to check the area. He jotted a brief note, no significance. But Daniel wasn't convinced. He said the car had no flashing lights, no markings on the door, just a dark green paint streak. Whitaker frowned slightly, closed his notebook and said, "We've checked it. Leave this to us." The conversation ended quickly, and Daniel's statement never made it into the official report. Over the next 10 days, the team continued scouring the lake area, then streams, cliffs, and old abandoned wells. They lowered ropes, shone flashlights, and found only murky water and debris. At the station, a wall map was covered in red pen marks, search circles overlapping. Helen visited daily, bringing coffee, asking for updates. The answer was always the same: "We're doing all we can." On the lake, summer water levels dropped, exposing a dark, sandy shore. Rumors spread that the car was submerged, but Whitaker shook his head. No evidence. The lake's shallow sonar found nothing. At the final meeting, 10 days after the disappearance was reported, Roy stood before the officers in the small stained wall room under dim yellow light. His voice was tired but firm. No signs of a crime, no clear witnesses, no new evidence. "We're suspending the search," no one objected. They were all exhausted. The afternoon rain fell again, pattering on the tin roof, the smell of damp earth filling the room. Whitaker looked out the window at the lake, shrouded in white mist. He signed the report, his handwriting sharp and bold under the pre-printed line, "Missing person." No foul play suspected. Outside, night fell over the town. In the Sanders home, the hallway light stayed on, casting a faint yellow glow onto the empty road. No one left the house anymore, and no one knew those dry lines on the report would be the only closure the case would see for nearly half a century. Almost a month later, when Prescott had stopped mentioning Emily Sanders and missing person flyers began peeling off telephone poles under the harsh sun, a man named Harold Bixby was fishing from a rowboat along Granite Creek, a small winding stream 3 miles from Watson Lake. The summer water was shallow, knee-deep, flowing slowly over mossy rocks. When his line snagged at a bend, Harold leaned over to pull it free and saw something caught beneath the water. He thought it was a rotten log, but as sunlight pierced the murky surface, he made out the shape of a hand. Harold dropped the rod, stumbling back in the boat. He rowed to shore, ran to the nearest gas station, and called the police, his voice shaking with panic. An hour later, Roy Whitaker and 2 officers arrived. They cordoned off the area, yellow tape swaying in the hot wind. In the creek, a young woman's body lay tilted, hair matted in clumps, wearing faded jeans and a light shirt plastered to her skin. No purse, no ID, 1 shoe missing. The body was heavily decomposed, the face distorted by water. A cold, fishy stench rose in the stifling air. Whitaker stood on the bank, hands on hips, silent for a long time. When a deputy asked if they should wait for the county coroner, he shook his head. "No need. Do it here. It's almost certainly her." He said it quietly, but everyone heard. No one disagreed. Another officer opened a notebook, scribbled a brief description, and took a few photos with an old Kodak film camera. No one measured distances or collected soil or fabric samples. They tied ropes, pulled the body from the water, and laid it on a plastic tarp. Helen Sanders was called to identify the body, but when she saw it in the morgue, she fainted. "I don't know if it's her," she said when she came to, "but the clothes look the same." That was enough. Whitaker signed a preliminary identification as consistent with the victim's description. He handed the case to Coroner Carl Myers for autopsy. The town buzzed. Word spread fast, and the next day the Prescott Evening Courier ran a story with a bold headline. The article stated that police believe the young woman met with an accident while walking near Watson Lake, possibly falling into the water and being swept away by the current. No one questioned why the body ended up in Granite Creek or why the car was never found. People just sighed, relieved the missing person case had an answer, though no one felt truly at ease. At the Sanders home, the dining table was cleared, Emily's framed photo placed in the center beside a vase of wildflowers. They held a small memorial, no coffin, just an old photo of Emily from her high school graduation. Roy Whitaker attended, in full uniform, delivering a brief eulogy in a hoarse voice. "We've lost a daughter of Prescott, but at least she's been brought home." The words moved some to tears, but as he stepped into the yard, his eyes were cold, distant. The next morning, white lilies still dewy from the dawn lay on the temporary altar at St. Luke's Church. A few blocks away, a vehicle carrying the body from Granite Creek quietly stopped at the gray brick building behind Prescott Hospital. Inside, the small coroner's room was lit by dim yellow light, smelling of disinfectant and cold metal. Dr. Carl Myers, the county's only coroner, arrived the next morning in a stained white coat, holding a thin file labeled Emily Sanders. He was used to traffic accidents, drunken falls, occasional bar fights, never a missing person case this big. The body lay on a metal table, the air heavy with the smell of chemicals and decomposing water. Carl turned on the light, removed his gloves, and began on the left wrist. A small leather watch strap remained. The face stopped. No knife wounds, no major bruises. A slight tear on the back of the scalp from impact, likely from creek rocks, he noted. When he opened the chest, murky, muddy water poured from the lungs, a classic sign of drowning. He scribbled with a blue ballpoint, "Lungs contain fluid, probable drowning." He placed the lungs on a mechanical scale, the needle wavering before stopping. Everything was recorded by hand on an autopsy report form no bore. 11. The scene photos, taken with the Kodak, were mostly blurry from poor lighting. When developed, the girl's face on the table was barely recognizable. No signs of sexual assault, no clear broken bones, no bullet or knife wounds. Yavapai County's small coroner's office lacked bone scanners or detailed blood tests. Carl had only test tubes and water sample jars. He collected some lung fluid, labeled it, and stored it in a fridge. His final report, typed on an Olympia typewriter, read cause of death, drowning, manner of death, accidental. For time of death, he estimated approximately 3-4 weeks prior to discovery. No one mentioned dental record comparisons or tooth analysis, as Emily had no regular dentist. Her family had no x-rays for reference. Roy Whitaker visited the hospital at noon, carrying the missing person file. He didn't look at the body long, standing at a distance, then said, "I confirm, it's her." When Myers asked if further verification was needed, Whitaker shook his head. "No, the families identified her. Let's let them rest." In the summary report to the department, Whitaker wrote briefly, "Body identified as Emily Sanders, cause of death consistent with accidental drowning." He signed, stamping the red circular seal of the Prescott Police Department. Case 73-427 was marked closed. No one challenged it. No one requested further investigation. Emily's body was buried in a small cemetery south of town, beside dry poplars. Her headstone read only "Beloved Daughter." A few neighbors came, left wildflowers, and departed. At the station, Roy Whitaker returned to his desk, removed his hat, and opened a window to let the desert wind in. He looked at the completed file, its dry pages, fresh black ink. The afternoon rain tapped the glass, streaks sliding down like traces someone was trying to erase. Whitaker picked up a pen, drew a line under the report's final words, "Accidental drowning." As he closed the file, the lock snapped shut with a sharp sound. In the small room, only the smell of cold coffee and the faint glow of a desk lamp remained. Outside, Granite Creek flowed calmly, carrying sand and wood fragments. No one in town spoke of the disappearance anymore, and Prescott, as always, returned to its quiet routine. Case file 73-427 was completed in under a month from Emily Sanders' disappearance. 14 typed pages, black ink even, and dry, lacking the most critical details. No crime scene photos, no diagram of the body's location, no detailed description of the discovery site. The 4 Kodak photos were discarded for poor quality. Pinned with a rusty staple in the file's middle was Dr. Carl Myers' autopsy report, with his scrawled signature and the line "cause of death, accidental drowning." The final page bore Roy Whitaker's bold, forceful signature, confirming the case's closure. The silver necklace, the only item found during the search, was returned to Helen as a final gesture. The mother held it, its links cold, then stored it in a small wooden box in a drawer. Years later, when they moved, the box was gone. No one knew when it vanished, perhaps during a cleaning, or simply forgotten among old boxes. Throughout the file, not a single line mentioned the silver Ford Galaxy, no one requested a search for it, no stolen vehicle report was filed, no lake search was conducted after the body was identified. For Roy Whitaker, the car and the girl were part of the same conclusion: accidental drowning. He saw no need to look further. 2 weeks later, at the Prescott Police Department's annual review, Roy received a commendation for swiftly resolving the Emily Sanders disappearance, closing the case efficiently. A photo captured him shaking hands with the county chief, both smiling, the flash glinting in the smoky room. The picture ran on page 2 of the Prescott Courier, below a story about a wildfire in the next county. No one noticed Roy's smile was stiff, his eyes off the lens. The Sanders family didn't attend the ceremony. They stopped visiting the station. To them, Emily's death never had a true answer. George, her father, still drove along Highway 89A every weekend, passing Watson Lake, pausing to stare at its mirror-like surface. He said nothing, just sat in the car, hands on the wheel, until the sun sank behind the granite dells. Helen rarely left the house. When anyone mentioned accident, she shook her head, her eyes empty. "My daughter could swim," she said. "She'd never fall into the water," but no one listened. In Prescott, life soon returned to normal. Kids played ball on dirt roads. The diner played country music, and Watson Lake drew weekend fishermen. When the disappearance came up, people only said, "That poor girl, at least she was found." Old newspapers with headlines about the drowned Prescott student were folded and stored in the local library. At the police station, File 73-427 was placed in the third drawer of a metal cabinet, between 2 car theft cases. Roy Whitaker penciled a brief note, "Closed, July 1973. He stopped mentioning the girl's name in meetings. When asked, he'd say, "That case is done." And for the paperwork, it was. In the years that followed, Whitaker continued to rise through the ranks. He was regarded as calm, decisive, bringing order to Prescott during challenging times. At press conferences, he often spoke of maintaining the image and integrity of the force, his voice steady and resolute. The name Emily Sanders never came up again. Occasionally, late at night in the station, with only the ticking of the wall clock and the glow of a desk lamp, Roy would open the drawer, pull out the old file, and skim through it. He'd pause at the line, "accidental drowning," then close it. The drawer shut, the metallic clang echoing in the empty room. Prescott carried on, as if no tragedy had ever occurred. Watson Lake still reflected the moonlight, and evening fishermen cast their lines into its calm waters, unaware that somewhere beneath the deep mud, an untold story lay silent. In the years that followed, the Emily Sanders case faded from Prescott's memory, like fine dust settling on the cover of an old file. The 1980s brought changes. New highways were built, residential areas sprang up around the lake, and the Prescott Police Department merged into the Yavapai County system, rebranded, with new faces. The officers who joined the initial search had either moved away or retired. No one spoke of the missing girl anymore, except for some older folks who at the bar at the end of the street recounted it as a vague tale. "That girl slipped into the lake, I think." Roy Whitaker was promoted to lieutenant colonel before retiring in 1988. He left Prescott, sold his old house on Grove Street, and moved to Phoenix with his wife. People said he received a generous pension and spent much of his time gardening, occasionally returning to town for county police memorials. Whenever someone asked about the Emily case, he'd give a faint smile. "That case is closed, poor girl, just an accident." The response became a rehearsed script, repeated so often that no one bothered to ask further. Prescott entered a tourism boom. The dirt roads of yesteryear were paved, and motels and souvenir shops popped up around Watson Lake. The once desolate shoreline now had wooden docks, walking paths, and spacious parking lots. Every weekend, people came to kayak, fish, or picnic. Children played by the water, their laughter mingling with the breeze. No one remembered this place as the heart of a disappearance, that beneath its serene surface, a car was never found. In a corner of the new police station's office, steel filing cabinets stood in rows. File 73, IS 427, its yellowed cover faded, sat buried among hundreds of other old cases. No one touched it for decades. The handwritten label, Sanders, Emily, had faded, leaving only smudged ink. Whenever a new clerk was assigned to inventory files, they'd glance at it, mark, closed, 1973, and move on. No one opened it. Sometimes, during the rainy season when the lake rose, people claimed to see a metallic glint under the water, but patrol teams never found anything. Such rumors only fueled barroom stories, probably that girl's car sunk somewhere near the west shore. But no one verified them, as no one believed anything remained after all those years. Roy Whitaker grew old, his hair grayed, his health weakened. He rarely left his Phoenix home, occasionally attending retired police gatherings, still carrying the air of a man who once held authority. To him, the Emily Sanders case was forever just an old accident in a long list of past cases. In March 2019, the Arizona Department of Public Safety announced the Cold Case Review Program, a project to re-examine unresolved or potentially mishandled cases from the 1950s to 1990s. The goal was to apply modern forensic technology, particularly DNA analysis and new evidence-matching techniques. Hundreds of files from across counties were sent to the Phoenix Data Center for digitization. Among the old documents sent from Prescott, File 73 Mitrans 427 landed on the desk of Lena Ward, a young forensic specialist fresh from federal investigative training. Her task was to verify the integrity of case files, cross-checking evidence, photos, and chain of custody. When she opened the yellowed file, she immediately noticed something off. No crime scene photos, no DNA samples, no fingerprint logs, no vehicle records. At the end, a misaligned typed note read, "Body identified by visual confirmation, Sheriff Roy Whitaker." Lena frowned. By modern standards, visual identification without dental comparison was unacceptable. She flipped through each page, finding torn sections, rusty staples leaving rips. In the evidence log, there was only one line, "Silver necklace, returned to family." No photos, no recipient signature, no return date. Missing chain of custody, she noted in her internal report, marking the file with a red label, "To be reviewed asterisk." As she entered the data into the system, she paused at the description. Accidental drowning, Watson Lake, July 1973. Then she added a small italicized note, as she did for cases that unsettled her. Possible misclassification, subject to further examination. No one could have predicted that this brief note, scribbled on a hot afternoon in the Phoenix Data Center, would spark the revival of a case thought long dead. From a 14-page file, no one read, the story of a girl who vanished in the Arizona desert was about to enter a new chapter, this time under the light of technology and the persistence of those who never knew her. In March 2020, Prescott was far from the small town of old. Souvenir shops lined the main street, tourists bustling around Watson Lake. The AZ-89 highway cutting through the red dirt hills was being widened, the sound of excavators and bulldozers echoing day and night. That morning, workers from Hauser & Sons were digging up old soil near a road connecting to a new resort. When the excavator's blade hit something hard, the driver thought it was a rock. But as he backed up, a metallic glint emerged from the dust. He shut off the machine, stepped down and looked closer. A curved, smooth metal edge, caked in dirt, appeared resembling a car's wheel rim. The report reached Prescott police by 10 a.m. an hour later. The site was cordoned off with yellow tape. The Yavapai County forensic team and Arizona Department of Public Safety representatives arrived. Desert wind blew strong, carrying the smell of dry earth and distant engines. Under the harsh March sun, the unearthed soil looked like a fresh wound on the town's surface. As the final layers were cleared, the vehicle's shape emerged, a 1970 Ford Galaxy, silver, with a broken roof and front wheels sunk deep. The rear license plate, though rusted, was legible. 9A3219, matching the registration in Emily Sanders' 1973 file perfectly. The next morning, the site was covered with a large white tarp. Arizona's early sunlight glinting off the dry ground, bathing the area in a golden glow. The Arizona Department of Public Safety's forensic team arrived from Phoenix, 12 people in bright hazmat suits, every step documented. In the deep pit, the 1970 Ford Galaxy sat where it was found, dust still coating its windshield and hood. No one spoke loudly. They moved slowly, as if each grain of dirt held a secret buried for nearly half a century. Lena Ward, the forensic specialist who reviewed File 73-427, stood beside the site supervisor. She was the first to lean toward the driver's door, her eyes focused. The lock was rusted, but a flashlight revealed the latch was in the locked position. The gear shift was still in park. "No signs of sliding," she said softly. Another technician examined the right window, where a star-shaped crack spread. The crack's center was inside the glass, fractures radiating outward. The glass had been pushed out, not struck from outside. The team paused, exchanging knowing glances. Only a blow from within, or strong internal pressure, could cause such a break. As the sun rose higher, they began clearing dirt around the wheels. The soil was dry, tightly packed, not natural. Midway down, a technician found a dark oil streak. The soil sample went into a nylon bag, labeled 08A1. In the temporary field lab, they examined it under a microscope. The oil had the color and smell of old Caterpillar hydraulic fluid, common in the 1970s. Lena noted, soil sample contains traces of Caterpillar hydraulic oil, possible mechanical burial. She stood back, surveying the scene. The surrounding ground was unevenly packed, with a straight cut at the pit's edge, a mark of an excavator's blade. No signs of the car sliding or falling. If the Galaxy had veered off the road, it would have left a trail, but the area was flat, hard, as if leveled. "Someone lowered it," Lena said quietly. Inside the car, the team found more key details. The driver's seat was reclined, the seatbelt fastened. No airbags, cars didn't have them then, but the steering wheel was slightly bent to the right, with a dark brown stain. They took a sample for testing. The skeleton's position showed an unnatural slump, head tilted right, matching the window crack. A skull fragment was exposed, smooth, with a small fracture across the temple. The team fell silent. No one said accident anymore. When the car was fully lifted, they spread a long tarp, laying out evidence: a leather wallet, student ID, photos, a silver necklace, bones, fabric scraps, car keys. Each was numbered, photographed, sealed. Every camera click echoed sharply in the empty landscape. That afternoon, Lena and the site supervisor walked the area to determine the burial's scope. Under the harsh sun, a dark soil streak ran west, parallel to AZ-89, like an old filled trench. This was a temporary construction route, a local engineer explained. Years ago, police and the town used this area to store dirt and materials. The statement made the team exchange glances. Lena jotted adjacent to old municipal lot, potential access by local authorities in 1970s. By sunset, as work neared completion, Lena stood a few meters from the pit, staring at the tarp-covered silver car. The sight stirred an indescribable feeling, both evidence and a grave. Something told her this wasn't just an accident. No one buries a car a meter deep in dry soil, locked from inside, window broken outward, unless they wanted it gone forever. The next day, a preliminary report was sent to the Phoenix Center, titled in bold "Scene Assessment, Prescott, Arizona." Under the tentative conclusion, Lena typed carefully: "Vehicle found intentionally buried. Cables, ground composition, and hydraulic oil indicate use of construction machinery. Doors locked from inside, Right window broken outward. Possible homicide. Below, she added, preliminary conclusion, intentional burial, potential cover-up. In Prescott, news spread faster than expected. That evening, local TV aired footage of the Ford Galaxy being pulled from the pit, yellow lights illuminating its dulled frame. The reporter spoke slowly. Arizona State Police are investigating the possibility that this was not an accident, as concluded in 1973. In homes around Watson Lake, people watched, feeling an eerie mix of familiarity and strangeness. Many had aged. Some had known Emily Sanders, others had heard of the disappearance. Now, as the car surfaced, it was as if the past rose with the dust. Samples from the Prescott site were sent to the Arizona Department of Public Safety's Central Forensic Lab in Phoenix 2 days after the car's discovery. In the sterile white lab, forensic specialists in hazmat suits and latex gloves moved between metal trays and DNA analyzers. On a separate table, the silver necklace sat beside bags of human bones from the driver's seat, each sample coded, sealed, and stored per protocol. Lena Ward, who'd followed the case from the start, was tasked with overseeing the examination phase. She was the first to lift the skull under fluorescent light. Examining the back, she saw a long, slightly curved fracture from the occipital bone to the temple. The crack was sharp, clean, with no erosion from water or natural impact. Not from a fall or accident, she told a colleague, her voice firm. This is direct trauma from a blunt object. The forensic team compared the remaining teeth to dental records from Arizona State University, where Emily studied. After days of searching, they found a 1972 X-ray of her upper jaw from a dental visit. Overlaying the old X-ray with digital images of the recovered teeth, the alignment was perfect. Wisdom tooth placement, a chipped incisor, all matched. The result was triple verified by an independent dental forensic team. The report's conclusion, dental comparison consistent with Emily R. Sanders. Simultaneously, the biology team extracted DNA from a femur and a hair with an intact root. Mitochondrial DNA sequencing, a technology non-existent in 1973, was used. Results returned after 72 hours, 99.98% match with maternal DNA reference sample. The reference came from Emily's niece, the only living Sanders relative, with a perfect genetic match. The victim was officially identified as Emily Rebecca Sanders, 19, missing since July 1973. In the over 50-page forensic report, the preliminary findings were clear. Asterisk, no evidence of drowning. Fracture pattern on occipital bone indicates single blow with blunt object. Position of skeleton, consistent with placement post-mortem inside vehicle. Manner of death. Homicide dat. Lena sat before the screen, rereading the lines. Each word overturned nearly half a century of conclusions. Helen Sanders had passed away a decade earlier, leaving no family to hear the news. But Lena felt compelled to read aloud. Cause of death. Skull trauma from a blunt object. Not drowning. In the DPS meeting room that afternoon, forensic specialists, investigators, and Arizona's prosecutorial representatives sat around a table. A large screen displayed a reconstructed skull, the red fracture line stark against the white bone. Lena presented. The impact came from behind, strong enough to cause unconsciousness or death instantly. The victim was then placed in the driver's seat, and the car was lowered into the ground with machinery. Someone asked, "Buried alive?" Lena shook her head. No, the victim was already dead. No signs of respiration in soil or water. The room fell silent. Prosecutor Harold Keene closed his file. A law student in Prescott in 1973, he vividly recalled the missing person posters. Now, nearly half a century later, he stared at the photo of the buried Ford Galaxy, his voice rough. If this is a murder, it's not just a crime, it's a cover-up. He ordered a special task force with DPS, led by Detective Karen Fields, experienced in complex cold cases. In the press release the next day, The prosecutor's office stated, "Forensic analysis has confirmed the remains in the Ford Galaxy found in Prescott belonged to Emily Sanders, missing since 1973. Based on physical evidence, the cause of death is skull trauma from a blunt object." The Arizona Attorney General's office has officially reopened the case as a criminal homicide investigation. When the broadcast aired, the silver car reappeared on TV, now with red text scrolling, "Cold case reopened after 47 years." Prescott residents were stunned. Many who believed the accidental drowning felt their memories betrayed. Old articles were dug up, details compared with Roy Whitaker's name, the sheriff back then, casting a shadow over it all. That night, in the darkened lab, Lena stayed late. On her desk was Emily's college photo, bright eyes, gentle smile, printed from an image found in the wallet. She placed it beside the new report, under the line "Manner of Death, Homicide." A breeze through a small window rustled the paper. She knew, from this moment, everything had changed. The Emily Sanders case was no longer about a girl who met with an accident. It was a bigger question: who buried her, and why did Prescott stay silent for 47 years? After the Arizona Attorney General's announcement, Detective Karen Fields was brought from Tucson to Prescott to take over the case. In her 40s, known for her patience and obsessive detail in southern U.S. cold cases, she understood the Emily Sanders case wasn't just about finding a killer. It was confronting a generation of silence. Karen requested all original 1973 documents. File 73-427 was pulled from storage, its dark yellow cover still marked "Closed." Wearing gloves, she carefully opened it. The smell of old paper and rusted metal rose like time trapped. Inside were the missing person report, brief officer statements, and the autopsy report. But at the end, she stopped. 2 pages were torn out, clean rips with fibers still clinging. The last line of the previous page cut off mid-sentence. Officers report that, then nothing. No continuation. She called a legal technician to photograph and note the torn pages, then continued. In the appendix, where evidence logs should have been, there was only a blank page with a rusted staple. No record of the silver necklace, no handover signature. Karen tilted her head, frowning. Such omissions couldn't be accidental. She moved to the victim identification page. The signature, in thick black ink, slanting right, read Roy Whitaker. Karen pulled Whitaker's personnel file from DPS archives, the man who served as Prescott sheriff for 20 years. Comparing signatures from the 1973 report and his 1988 retirement form, she held them under a light. The strokes matched perfectly, down to the final pen flick. "He signed twice on the same document," she said softly. "One real, one forged." The autopsy report also gave her pause. Per protocol then, autopsies had 2 copies, one for the coroner, one for the sheriff. But the file held only the first part, body description and accidental drowning. The conclusion, including time, witnesses, and coroner's signature, was gone. She called the state coroner's office to check Carl Meyer's archives, the coroner from back then. Result: no originals remained, no data logs. All of Meyer's records from 1970, 1974 were reported lost in a 1982 archive flood. Each detail formed a hard truth. The Emily Sanders case wasn't solved. It was deliberately closed. Karen suspected only someone with authority and motive could do this. Roy Whitaker, who led the investigation, signed the conclusion and managed all evidence. She obtained a warrant for Prescott Police Department's old financial and personnel records. In the 1973 equipment list, she found an entry, Caterpillar 955HH purchased, May 1972, managed by Sheriff Roy Whitaker. The excavator matched the oil traces found in the soil covering the Galaxy. Karen printed all documents, spreading them across a table like piecing together a torn painting. Every detail pointed one way. But she knew proving Whitaker didn't just falsify records, but was directly involved in the burial required more. That afternoon, she visited the Prescott Library, accessing old newspaper archives, Among hundreds of microfiche rolls, she found the July 31st, 1973, Prescott Evening Courier, page 2, showed Roy shaking hands with the county chief, captioned, "Sheriff Whitaker, commended for swiftly resolving the Emily Sanders disappearance." In the photo, he stood by a filing cabinet, a map of Watson Lake behind him. A small detail caught her eye. A red circle marked Granite Creek, the exact spot the body was found. "Why mark that location before the body was discovered?" she murmured. That evening, back at a small hotel near Prescott Center, she logged her findings in her investigation journal. Evidence of tampering in file 73-427. 2 pages torn, autopsy report missing conclusion, evidence unaccounted for. Roy Whitaker's signature matches forged copy. Caterpillar excavator, traces match site soil. Primary suspect Roy Whitaker, former Prescott sheriff. Possible motive, cover-up of misconduct or direct involvement in victim's death. Karen knew she was touching something more dangerous than an old case, the reputation of an entire town. For 47 years, Roy Whitaker was revered as Prescott's guardian. Now every investigative thread led back to him. She called prosecutor Harold Keene, reporting briefly, "We have reason to believe the 1973 investigation's leader falsified results." After a few seconds of silence, he replied, "Keep going, Fields. Don't let anyone in Prescott know until we're certain." Outside the window, the sunset draped over the old red brick houses of the town. The wind carried the dry smell of earth and gasoline. Karen looked out, seeing Watson Lake glimmer in the evening light, serene as if nothing had ever happened. But in her heart, she knew that from this peaceful place, a buried story was rising, and the name Roy Whitaker, thought to have faded into old photographs, was about to face the pages of the file he himself had torn apart. 2 weeks after Karen Fields uncovered signs of tampered records, she received an unexpected call from the Yavapai County Court archivist. The man's voice trembled. "We just found some items in the old sealed storage of the Sanders family. There's a silver necklace, listed in the 1998 estate inventory. Would you like to see it?" Karen immediately got in her car and drove nearly 2 hours to Prescott. The necklace was wrapped in old cloth, placed in a small discolored wooden box. When she opened it, light reflected off the tarnished metal. It was the thin silver chain, with a leaf-shaped clasp Helen had described in the old file, the only evidence ever mentioned, then lost. Karen, wearing gloves, carefully lifted it, placed it in an evidence bag, and labeled it, Evidence Hash 73427R1. Back in Phoenix, she sent the necklace to the DPS biology lab. Technicians swabbed the inner surface of the chain, where it had contacted skin the most. The sample was analyzed in a modern DNA sequencer. The initial result on the screen silenced the room, a male DNA profile, clear and stable, undegraded by time. When cross-checked with Arizona's law enforcement biometric database, it returned a name, Roy Whitaker. Karen stood before the digital board, staring at the matching genetic sequences. There was no doubt, the DNA of the former Prescott sheriff, who closed the case, was on the only evidence tied to the victim. There was no reasonable explanation for this other than his direct contact with Emily's body or possessions. She requested the test be run 3 more times. The results didn't change. While awaiting forensic confirmation, the chemistry team analyzed the oxide layer on the necklace's surface. Using an energy dispersive spectrometer, they identified iron oxide and traces of glossy black paint, industrial paint used on the Smith & Wesson Model 10 pistol, standard issue for Prescott PD, in 1973. A technician explained, the necklace likely contacted the gun's barrel or grip during an impact. Karen froze. In that moment, the 2020 autopsy report's cracked skull fragment flashed in her mind. She called prosecutor Harold Keene, reporting briefly, "We have Whitaker's DNA on the evidence, plus, the oxide matches the paint on PD's standard issue gun from that era." The line was silent for a long moment. Finally he said, "Do you realize what this means? If true, this isn't just a cover-up. It's a deliberate murder within the police force. In the following days, Karen worked almost without sleep. She reviewed the 1973 Prescott PD weapons inventory. Records showed 3 Smith & Wesson pistols issued for the July 7th night shift, one registered to Roy Whitaker. A small note beside it chilled her, returned next morning, cleaned. In the unit's log, only Whitaker recorded cleaning the weapon at home. When the final analysis arrived, the 11-page report was stamped confidential, state evidence. Its conclusion read, male DNA sample from the inner silver chain matches Roy Whitaker's biometric profile exactly. No other individual's DNA detected. Chemical analysis confirms Fe3O4, oxide and black polymer paint, consistent with the coating on Smith & Wesson Model 10 grips, produced 1970-1974. Conclusion: the evidence likely contacted the weapon or its possessor near the time of the victim's death. Karen set the report down, feeling the room grow strangely silent. She looked out the window at Arizona's sky, turning coppery red. The scattered evidence from 47 years, the buried car, excavator oil, torn pages, forged signature, and now DNA, was forming an undeniable truth. That evening, she presented the findings to the investigative team. "We've moved beyond hypothesis," she said. "Everything points to one person, Roy Whitaker. He had the means, authority, and motive. He led the investigation, controlled the evidence, and now his biological trace is on the victim's necklace." An investigator asked, "Motive?" Karen replied, "Unknown yet. But he may have known the victim, or he was hiding something else." As the meeting ended, she stayed alone in the room, pulling up the necklace's photo on the screen. Its faint silver glinted under the desk lamp. She pictured the scene 47 years ago, a silent desert night. The Ford's headlights flashing across the lake, and a man's hand holding a glossy black pistol, touching that silver chain before everything vanished under the earth. The next morning, Karen sent the full evidence file to the state prosecutor's office with an official petition. Physical and biological evidence provide sufficient grounds to designate Roy Whitaker, former Prescott sheriff, as the primary suspect in the murder of Emily Sanders, requesting a warrant to examine assets, financial records, and related witnesses. She signed, dating it October 10, 2020. On her desk, the forensic report remained open, its bold final lines standing out in the early light. DNA match confirmed, suspect identified, Roy Whitaker. Karen Fields knew the file was only part of the truth. To reach the rest, she needed people, those present in Prescott in 1973, when Roy Whitaker still held power. From the old PD roster, only 3 names were still alive: Daniel Ricks, Mark Heller, and Cynthia Hale. 3 witnesses, 3 fragmented memories, but together, they could form the shadow of the man who tried to bury the case with the car. The first was Daniel Ricks, now in his 60s, living in Cottonwood, an hour's drive from Prescott. He was Emily Sanders' old classmate who reported seeing a police car near Watson Lake the night she vanished. His small house faced the desert, its yard full of dry grass and a broken TV antenna. Daniel opened the door, wary, but when Karen introduced herself as a DPS investigator, he sighed. "I've been waiting for this call for nearly half a century." In the cluttered living room, Daniel recounted the night as if it were yesterday. "I left the party before Emily. As I drove off, I saw headlights dimming in the lot by the lake. I thought it was a police car because I recognized the green paint stripe of Prescott PD back then. I even saw the driver's silhouette, sitting still, no interior lights on. It struck me as odd, patrol cars never parked there at night." He paused, then added, "The next day, when I heard Emily was missing, I told the police. Roy Whitaker took my statement. He listened, smirked, and said I was mistaken, that it was one of our patrol cars. He told me, 'Don't talk to the press.' I stayed quiet, but I've never forgotten how he looked at me, like I'd seen something I shouldn't have." Karen recorded the entire conversation, thanked him, and left. The first piece of evidence was clear: Whitaker was near the lake the night Emily disappeared. The second was Deputy Mark Heller, now in a nursing home on Phoenix's outskirts. He'd served under Whitaker from 1970 to 1975. When Karen met him, he was frail, his voice shaky, but his memory sharp. "You're asking about that girl," he said, staring into the distance. "I remember it clearly. I was in charge of the dive team for Watson Lake. We were set to use manual sonar to scan the bottom. But before we started, Roy pulled me aside and said, verbatim, 'Stop it, Heller. There's nothing in that lake. Don't waste the budget.' I argued we should check, but he got so angry, I had to stop." A week later, the case was closed. I knew something was wrong, but I was a subordinate, no power. Karen asked, "Do you think Whitaker stopped the dive because he knew the car wasn't there?" Heller pursed his lips, his voice low. "I don't think, I'm certain. He didn't want anyone touching that lake. The day I left the department, I swore I'd never be a cop again." His words sent a chill down Karen's spine. She recorded every word, Heller's hoarse voice in the recorder. "He knew, ma'am. He always knew." The final witness was Cynthia Hale, Whitaker's secretary at Prescott PD from 1972 to 1979. Karen met her in Flagstaff, where she lived with her daughter. Cynthia greeted her cautiously, but when Karen mentioned Emily Sanders, she fell silent for a long time. "I never thought anyone would ask about that again," she said softly, pouring tea with trembling hands. "I was 21, just a typist. I was tasked with typing the Emily case reports. There were 2 copies, one Whitaker sent to the county, one he kept. But I clearly remember the original conclusion wasn't accidental drowning. Dr. Myers wrote, 'Cause undetermined, further testing needed.' I saw Whitaker take a red pen, cross it out, and retype accidental drowning. Then he signed both copies, one real, one for the file." Karen held her breath, asking softly, "Are you sure?" Cynthia nodded. "Positive. I typed it. And I remember what he said after signing. 'Sometimes the truth just complicates things, Hale. We need to wrap this up fast.'" Her statement matched everything Karen had found, the torn pages, forged signature, and truncated autopsy report. Hale looked down, her voice hoarse. "I was scared of him. Everyone in town was. Roy had power, connections, and no one dared question him. But since I saw the case reopened, I haven't slept. I always knew this day would come." Back in Phoenix, Karen played all 3 recordings simultaneously, 3 different voices, but all fitting like perfect puzzle pieces: the police car by the lake, the order to stop diving, the forged signature, and the words "wrap this up fast." All pointed to one man, Roy Whitaker. She wrote in her investigation journal, "Independent witnesses confirm Whitaker was at the lake the night of the victim's disappearance, deliberately obstructed the search, and falsified forensic documents. DNA on the evidence corroborates their accounts. The case structure is now clear: approach, action, cover-up, control of records." That evening, Karen sat alone, staring at the dense file on her desk. In the yellow lamplight, Roy Whitaker's name repeated dozens of times, like the steady pulse of a ghost refusing to fade. She knew the next step wasn't just investigation, it was confrontation. And the man once hailed as Prescott's hero was about to hear what he'd done, through the trembling voices of those who stayed silent for 47 years. One late October morning, with Arizona's sky so clear the Granite Del's rocky crevices stood sharp, Karen Fields and the DPS Cold Case Unit returned to the scene. Their goal: reconstruct the 1973 crime scene using modern topography technology. They set up a field tent by the edge of AZ-89, where the Ford Galaxy was unearthed 7 months earlier. The geological survey team brought laser LiDAR scanners, optical GPS, and 1973 topographic maps from the U.S. Geological Survey archives. In the early sunlight, they overlaid old and new data. Contour lines emerged like Earth's fingerprints. The area where the car was found sloped only 4 degrees southwest, too shallow for any vehicle to slide, especially with the gear in park and handbrake engaged. Lead engineer Martin Levitt stood beside Karen, pointing at the map. "Look closely, the slope here isn't enough for a car to roll," he said firmly. A Ford Galaxy, about 2 tons, Needs at least an 18 to 20-degree incline to move. This is nearly flat. Karen nodded, eyes tracing the contour lines on the screen. So the car couldn't have fallen into a pit like the 1973 conclusion. Exactly, Levitt replied. It was dragged or lowered. The team analyzed tire tracks from excavation photos. Faint, parallel marks, spaced about 70 inches, didn't match the Galaxy's axle, but perfectly aligned with the tracks of a Caterpillar 955HE. The soil still held deep, distinct impressions of track teeth. Karen recalled the 1973 report. Whitaker directly managed this equipment in the PD's inventory. We rechecked the soil on the car's frame, a technician reported, holding spectral analysis photos. The covering soil has high calcium and limestone fragments, consistent with material from the town's North Quarry, the same source PD used for projects in 1973. He handed over a chemical report, its conclusion bold, soil composition consistent with municipal construction fill, batch No. 15, 1973. In other words, the soil burying the Galaxy came from Prescott PD's construction projects. Karen stood still for a moment, then said softly, they buried it themselves. To verify, the team built a 3D model simulating the night the car vanished. They reconstructed the route from Watson Lake to the discovery site, using 1973 traffic data, weather, and moonlight. On the large screen, the silver Ford Galaxy moved slowly along the dirt road, stopping at a depression, now part of AZ-89's expansion. Per the team's hypothesis, a Caterpillar excavator arrived afterward, lowering the car into a pre-dug pit and covering it in minutes. It all happened silently, over half a mile from the nearest homes. No one could do this without heavy equipment and site access, Levitt said. And in 1973, only one person had both, Roy Whitaker. His words hung in the air, cold and clear like clashing metal. Karen noted it, eyes fixed on the model. So he didn't just kill her. He used PD assets to hide the crime. That afternoon, they surveyed nearby areas. A fragment of yellow paint was found deep in the soil, preliminary analysis showing it was industrial paint used on PD construction vehicles in the 1970s. Another small but damning detail. As the sun set, casting red over the old land, the laser scanners continued, logging thousands of data points. That evening, in a temporary roadside meeting room, Karen and the team held an urgent briefing. The preliminary report on the screen listed 4 points. Asterisk 4-degree ground slope, rules out natural fall. Track marks match Caterpillar 955H, PD Prescott vehicle. Covering soil matches PD construction material from 1973. Preliminary conclusion, intentional burial using police equipment, probable concealment of homicide. Karen leaned back in her chair, hands clasped. Everything was moving faster than she expected. The evidence was no longer speculative. Physical data, science and witnesses converged on one point. She recalled Deputy Heller's words. He said, "Stop diving. There's nothing in that lake." Now it turned out the nothing was a grave Roy Whitaker created, just miles from the shore. As night fell, wind swept through the dry land, swirling red dust around the survey site. Karen stood alone, gazing at Watson Lake, where moonlight reflected like a silver blade. She thought of Emily Sanders, the 19-year-old buried under layers of earth her killer once called public property. Back in Phoenix, the full report was completed in 3 days. On the final page, under the bold reconstruction summary, case hash 73427, the team's conclusion read, based on topographic data, mechanical traces and soil analysis, the scene indicates the 1970 Ford Galaxy was intentionally buried using a Caterpillar excavator managed by Prescott Police Department. Ground slope and vehicle position rule out an accident. Covering soil matches construction material used in PD's 1973 lot expansion. As Karen signed it, she paused. She knew this report wasn't just evidence, It was the blast shattering a town's wall of silence. From the dry grains of earth, the truth was taking shape. Now, only one task remained: confront the man who ordered it buried. The topographic evidence left Karen Fields nearly certain of how the Ford Galaxy was buried. But she needed one final piece. The Caterpillar excavator Roy Whitaker managed. If she could prove it was used at the time Emily Sanders vanished, the entire crime would no longer be a theory. In the Prescott PD's administrative archive, among rotting file boxes, she found a thick folder labeled Equipment Inventory 1970, 1975. Flipping to the heavy machinery section, Karen stopped. A typed entry read clearly: Asterisk Caterpillar, 955H, purchased May 1972, purpose: clearing operations. Municipal Lot Maintenance Supervisor, Sheriff Roy Whitaker, asterisk. The next line made her frown. Usage log discontinued after July 1973. The excavator's activity record stopped abruptly after Emily's disappearance. She turned to the next page. In the user's signature column, the last entry, dated July 7, 1973, was signed R. Whitaker. No entries followed, just blank space until year's end. At the log's bottom, a faint note: machine transferred to storage yard, September 1973. Karen stood still, gripping the paper. Physical evidence of Whitaker accessing the equipment that night was now undeniable. But she needed a witness to confirm he actually operated the excavator. Tracing the 1972-1974 PD roster, she found Earl Dougherty, the mechanic who maintained all department machinery. Records showed he retired in 1981 and lived in Clarkdale, 50 miles from Prescott. She called, her voice trembling slightly as a gruff, elderly voice answered. "Mr. Dougherty? I'm an investigator with the DPS Cold Case Unit. I need to ask about the Caterpillar 955H from Prescott PD in 1973. Well, that machine? Never thought anyone would ask." 2 days later, Karen drove to Clarkdale. The small house sat on a hill, its front yard littered with rusted metal. The faint smell of motor oil lingering. The man, over 80, short but with sharp eyes, led her inside. "You're right," he began as they sat. "I maintained that excavator. And you know, it had a distinct sound, heavy, rumbling. You'd recognize it instantly." Karen started her recorder. "Do you recall the last time that machine was used?" He paused, then nodded slowly. "Clear as day. It was a July night. I remember because it wasn't raining, but the air smelled of wet earth. After midnight, I heard the engine start from the PD's back lot. I thought someone was testing it, but it was odd. No one was allowed to operate it at night without orders. I looked through the fence and saw the Caterpillar 955H. The driver was Roy Whitaker." Karen leaned forward. "You're sure?" "More than sure," he said. "He wore a leather jacket, headlights off, only the cab's dim light on. I saw his figure clearly. The machine left the lot, heading toward the dirt road to the expansion area. I asked the next day, but no one knew anything, and the log was taken. When I asked Roy, he just grinned, said special duty. A week later, the machine was sealed and moved to storage. I never saw it run again." Karen's heart raced. Hale said Whitaker forged signatures. Heller said he stopped the dive. Rick saw the police car by the lake. Now Dougherty confirmed Whitaker drove the excavator out that night. "Anything else you remember?" she asked. "Yeah," he closed his eyes slowly. 2 days later, I was ordered to clean the entire frame and tracks. I remember because it was caked in mud, light-colored with limestone flecks, not from around the station. I asked Whitaker, and he said, "Wash it fast, no log." After I finished, he wiped it down himself with a rag and said, "From now on, act like it never ran." Karen gripped her pen, the recorder's needle blinking. Those words tied the entire chain. Whitaker used the PD's Caterpillar to lower and bury the car and body, then erased all traces from the logs. As she left Clarkdale, the afternoon sun was fading. Arizona's desert stretched ahead, golden light spilling over red hills, the same color as the soil that once hid the Ford Galaxy. She stopped by the road, breathing deeply, feeling the heat rise from the asphalt, her heart torn between rage and cold resolve. That evening, in her report to the prosecutor's office, she wrote, "PD asset records confirm Roy Whitaker was the last to operate the Caterpillar 955H on July 7, 1973, the night of the victim's disappearance. Witness Earl Daugherty, 84, confirms seeing Whitaker drive the machine from the lot that night. Soil cleaned from the tracks matches the 2020 excavation site. Evidence supports the suspect using department equipment to bury the car and victim's body." Karen printed the report, signed it, and sat still. On her desk was a photo of a young Whitaker, the man once celebrated as Prescott's symbol, now emerging in her eyes, not as a dedicated officer but as someone who used his badge to conceal a crime. And now, 47 years later, the Prescott PD's excavator had spoken for the young girl buried under that dry earth, telling the story he thought he'd erased forever. Back in Phoenix in early November, Karen Fields spread all the files, photos, reports and testimonies across the long table in the cold case unit's room. The cold white fluorescent light illuminated each paper, revealing a crime map pieced together after 47 years of silence. She stood staring for minutes, taking a deep breath. It was all here, every scattered piece now a complete chain of evidence, clear, precise, undeniable. At the table's center was the silver necklace photo, the only 1973 evidence, now the chain's starting link. It held Roy Whitaker's DNA, a perfect match to Prescott PD's biometric records from that era. Around it were chemical analyses, iron oxide and polymer paint, matching the coating on the Smith & Wesson Model 10 grip Whitaker was issued. Nearby was Emily Sanders' DNA result, a 99.98% match with her living relative. On the left, she placed a copy of the 73 Medicus 427 physical file, 2 torn pages, Whitaker's signature matching a forgery, and Cynthia Hale's testimony that he personally altered the autopsy conclusion from cause undetermined to accidental drowning. Below was an enlarged photo of Whitaker's signature on 2 documents, identical strokes, impossible without deliberate copying. Next were the technical reports, 4 degrees ground slope, Caterpillar 955H track marks, covering soil matching PD's 1973 construction material. In the final section was Earl Daugherty's testimony, confirming he saw Whitaker drive the excavator that night and was ordered to clean limestone-flecked mud, foreign to the station, 2 days later. Everything aligned. Karen pinned the papers to the whiteboard, connecting them with red string. DNS necklace gun paint excavator, covering soil witness testimony, falsified record, Whitaker. Each string was like a vein linking the past to the present. Every connection was a cut into the wall of silence Prescott had built for nearly half a century. When State Prosecutor Harold Keene entered, Karen silently pointed to the board. He stared for a long time, then said softly, "If this were a jury, they wouldn't need more evidence." Karen replied, her voice calm. "We're past suspicion, sir. We're looking at the truth." The meeting stretched late into the night. The prosecutor's office, investigators, and forensic experts reviewed every detail. Not one contradicted another. The logic formed a closed loop. Victim struck on the head, died placed in the car buried with PD excavator records, falsified case closed, all executed and controlled by one person. Harold Keene leaned back in his chair, removed his glasses, his voice low and hoarse. Roy Whitaker thought he could bury the past, but now the past has dug itself up. What's your recommendation? Karen looked straight at him. I propose charging him with first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. 3 days later, she submitted the formal petition to the Arizona Attorney General. The document, over 300 pages, summarized the entire investigation, including physical evidence, witness testimonies, forensic, financial, and administrative records. The final line was in bold, based on verified evidence, We determine Roy Whitaker, former Prescott sheriff, is the primary suspect in the 1973 murder of Emily Rebecca Sanders. We request the Arizona State Court approve an arrest warrant. On November 14, 2020, in the quiet Phoenix headquarters office, Harold Keene signed the warrant. The red seal pressed deep into the paper, State of Arizona, warrant of arrest. He looked up at Karen. From now on, this isn't a cold case anymore. It's an active murder case. The news was kept confidential, not yet disclosed. A task force was formed to execute the arrest, led by Karen. They located Whitaker's address, a quiet suburban Phoenix home where he lived with his second wife. At 85, his health was frail, but he was still respected locally as Prescott's hero. The night before the operation, Karen sat alone in her office, staring at a copy of a 1973 photo of Whitaker at a ceremony receiving commendation for swiftly resolving the Emily Sanders disappearance. The flash reflected off his gleaming badge, his smile confident. She placed it beside the freshly printed arrest warrant, a voice in her head whispering, he signed his own sentence 47 years ago. The next morning, the air at Sunrise Haven nursing home on Phoenix's outskirts was still misty. Arizona's sky shifted to amber, sunlight yet to spill over the palm trees out front. Karen Fields and the DPS task force parked 3 vehicles at the gate, silently checking equipment. The arrest warrant was signed, the search warrant tucked in her jacket pocket. Inside, Roy Whitaker, former Prescott sheriff, now 85, lived in a first-floor room overlooking a small garden. We proceed gently, Karen said softly, her voice steady, eyes fixed on the case file in her hand. He's old, but he's still a murder suspect. 7:02 a.m., 3 sharp knocks rang out. A nurse opened the door, startled by the uniformed group on the porch. Is Mr. Whitaker in his room? Karen asked. The nurse nodded, pointing down the hall. The door to room 112 was ajar. The silver-haired man sat at a table, wearing a neat beige sweater, holding a coffee mug. Seeing them, his eyes flickered with panic, then calmed. Karen stepped in, her voice low and clear. Mr. Roy Whitaker, I'm investigator Karen Fields, with the Arizona Cold Case Unit. You are under arrest for first-degree murder in connection with the death of Emily Rebecca Sanders in 1973. You have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. Anything you say can be used against you in court. Whitaker didn't resist. He set the mug down, his hands trembling slightly. As the cold cuffs clicked onto his wrists, he only said softly, his voice raspy, I knew this day would come. Outside, a few nursing home residents paused, watching silently. One recognized him, whispering, My God, it's Mr. Whitaker. The man once hailed as Prescott's icon was led out in the early light, walking slowly, head bowed, his shadow stretching long across the pale brick sidewalk. At DPS Phoenix headquarters, in a small white-walled interrogation room, a recorder sat between Whitaker and Karen, with Harold Keene present. Whitaker declined an attorney, at least initially. No need, he said. No one can defend me anymore. Karen opened the file, gently placing photos on the table, the unearthed Ford Galaxy, the silver necklace, the topographic map, and the old newspaper showing him receiving his 1973 commendation. You recognize these, don't you? She asked. Whitaker stared for a long time, then nodded slightly. Yes, they're all mine, and hers. Emily Sanders, Karen said, her voice low but sharp. What did you do to her, Mr. Whitaker? He was silent for a while. The wall clock ticked, its sound cutting through the space between them. Finally, he spoke, slow and weary. I didn't mean to kill her. Harold Keene leaned forward, attentive. Karen said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Whitaker continued, That night, I was patrolling near the lake. I saw her car parked alone. I knew Emily. She was the daughter of a family. I knew. Her father taught at my old high school. I approached to check on her, see if she needed help. But we argued. I'd been drinking. Not much, but enough to lose control. She got scared, tried to leave. I grabbed her arm. Then she pushed me. Or I pushed her. I don't remember. I just heard her head hit the car's edge. He paused, his eyes cloudy. No screams, just silence. Karen watched him, her expression unchanged. And what did you do next? I panicked. I put her in the driver's seat, locked the door. I knew people would suspect me. A sheriff seen with a dead young girl. My career was over. I couldn't bear it. I thought if I made it disappear, everything would be fine. He bowed his head, his voice nearly a whisper. I called a friend at the PD lot, got the Caterpillar. That night, I drove it out, buried the car in an old construction pit. I shoveled the dirt myself, covered it. By morning I was back at work like nothing happened. No one in the room spoke. The recorder clicked softly. Karen flipped a page, reading slowly. You altered the autopsy report, tore out 2 pages, and signed the accidental drowning conclusion. Correct? Whitaker nodded slightly. Yes, I knew Dr. Myers wanted to write "cause undetermined." I couldn't let that stand. I signed it, told everyone the records were lost. No one dared ask. Why? Harold Keene asked. Because you feared prison? Whitaker looked up, a faint spark of his former authority in his cloudy eyes. No, because I feared losing my reputation. I'd climbed from patrol officer to sheriff. I'd kept Prescott peaceful for years. One stupid accident could ruin it all. I thought, if she disappeared, it would be forgotten. Karen said softly. But you forgot that the dead don't disappear, Mr. Whitaker. They're just buried. And eventually, the earth speaks. Whitaker didn't reply. He stared at the table, his old hands trembling, wrists still marked by the cuffs. I didn't mean it. I just wanted time to forget. But it didn't. It just waited. Karen turned off the recorder. She looked at the man before her, no longer the powerful figure once celebrated, but a frail shell heavy with guilt. You had 47 years to say this, she said quietly. But now, there's nothing left to hide. Everything you said has been recorded. Whitaker nodded, closing his eyes. I know, and I deserve it. That noon, as police led Roy Whitaker from the interrogation room, the media waited outside. Cameras flashed relentlessly. The evening news across Arizona opened with former Prescott Sheriff Roy Whitaker arrested and admits involvement in the 1973 death of student Emily Sanders. He claims it was an unintended push, then buried the car to conceal it. In the DPS office, Karen stood by a glass window, watching the prisoner transport leave. The sky was clear, golden sunlight hitting the dry ground. She knew the Emily Sanders case was nearing its end. But what lingered wasn't triumph, but a heavy sadness, an emptiness when the truth finally spoke, too late for anyone to receive an apology. In the weeks after Roy Whitaker's arrest, the Arizona DPS forensic team and state prosecutor's office worked nearly non-stop. They needed to verify every detail of his interrogation statement, each point cross-checked scientifically to distinguish truth from evasion. Karen Fields coordinated. She knew if Whitaker's confession matched the scene, the court would need nothing more. But any discrepancy could let him flip the case with an unintended accident defense. The forensic team reopened the 3D crime scene model. Whitaker claimed he grabbed her arm, then she fell, hitting her head on the car's edge. Scientists reconstructed the impact on the 1970 Ford Galaxy, determining the rear door frame's edge was 1.05 meters high, exactly matching the occipital fracture on Emily Sanders' skull. The curved crack, sloping downward, indicated the victim was struck or fell while standing, her head hitting a flat, hard surface, perfectly consistent with the door's upper edge. Under scanning light, they found a small dent on the metal edge with traces of old organic tissue. Ancient protein testing confirmed a match with Emily's DNA. This injury aligns with his fall description, a forensic specialist reported. But the force was far stronger than a typical fall. It required a rear impact, at least equivalent to a grown man's push. Karen nodded, her voice calm. So his push was strong enough to kill. Whitaker's patrol route was analyzed by the administrative investigation team. They retrieved the July 1973 Prescott PD shift map. Though yellowed, Whitaker's signature was clear in the right corner. Wrote B, Watson Lake Perimeter. The shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., exactly when Daniel Rick saw a police car near the lake and Whitaker admitted passing through to check. The burial site was less than 2 miles from his route. Overlaying the 1973 patrol map with the 2020 topographic model, Whitaker's path aligned almost perfectly with the road to the burial pit. He didn't lie about being at the lake, Karen said, in an internal meeting. But the chance encounters has no basis. With this patrol schedule, he had to deliberately leave his route to reach a secluded area. Only someone intimately familiar with every inch around the lake would know a spot hidden enough to bury a car. Meanwhile, the necklace's DNA, the first and most critical evidence, was sent to the prosecutor's office as the final nail. The male genetic sequence matched Whitaker's hair sample 100%, triple verified to eliminate error. Experts argued, if this was merely an unintended accident, why was his DNA on the inner side of the chain, where it touched the victim's neck? It suggests he touched her body after death, Lena Ward, forensic team lead, said in a briefing, possibly when removing the necklace or placing her in the seat. The prosecution assembled the data like a complete equation. Asterisk cause of death, skull trauma from strong force, not drowning. Tool, hard object. Car door edge. Perpetrator at the scene. DNA and patrol route match. Post-death actions. Moving the body, burying the car with PD excavator. Post-investigation actions, falsifying records, tearing report pages, altering autopsy conclusions. Asterisk. This chain sufficed for second-degree murder when the perpetrator didn't intend to kill but caused death through action. It also supported 2 additional charges, concealing criminal evidence and falsifying public records. At the state prosecutor's meeting on December 22, 2020, Harold Keene read the indictment to the team. Scientific evidence and witness testimonies confirm Roy Whitaker caused the death of Emily Rebecca Sanders on the night of July 7, 1973. Then used his authority and Prescott PD assets to conceal the crime. He altered records, falsified autopsy reports, and corrupted the investigation. Arizona charges the defendant under Section 13-11-04. Second-degree murder, with related offenses. Karen sat in the back row, eyes fixed on the indictment. Those dry words were the culmination of nearly a year's investigation and 47 years of waiting. She recalled Emily's face in the old photo, the 19-year-old, with a shy smile. Every injury, every file line, every layer of soil had now told her story. In the interrogation room, when Whitaker was informed of the prosecution decision, he sat silently, hands clasped. "I'm old," he said, "and she's forever young." "I can't fix that," Karen replied, her voice low but firm. "No one can fix it. But at least now, you can't bury the truth anymore." As Whitaker was led to the holding cell, Karen stood in the hallway, watching through reflective glass. His small, hunched figure cast a shadow on the gray wall. On her office desk, the evidence chain was pinned tightly like a perfect circle. The fall, skull fracture, patrol route, DNA, necklace, covering soil, excavator, falsified records. Each detail was like a bone returned to its place, restoring the shape of a truth once crushed. That night, as Prescott lit up for Christmas, Karen drove past Watson Lake. The water was still, the wind carrying cold air and the sound of wood clinking at the dock. She stopped, gazing into the distance where the silver galaxy was once buried. In that moment, she thought of justice, time, and how the earth keeps secrets longer than people, but eventually, it too must speak. In spring 2021, Prescott returned to Arizona's spotlight as the Yavapai County Court opened the trial of Roy Whitaker, former sheriff, for the murder of Emily Rebecca Sanders. Nearly half a century after that silent night at Watson Lake, the courtroom was packed with reporters, residents, and aging faces from the 1970s, Prescott PD. Outside, TV cameras lined up, morning headlines bold, Arizona 1973 cold case solved, Eerist shocks community. Karen Fields sat behind the prosecution, with Harold Keene in front. She scanned the room, the state seal hung high, dust motes danced in the sunlight through the windows. All was quiet, save for the sound of pens scratching and pages turning. Across the table, Roy Whitaker sat still, in a gray shirt, his white hair thin, hands resting before him, his wrists uncuffed. At 85, he looked small, but his eyes held the hardness of a man who once gave orders. Behind him, his court-appointed lawyer prepared a pitifully thin defense file. Judge Laura Mendel, assigned to the case, began with a calm but firm voice, State of Arizona, Yavapai County, case number 73427, R, trial of defendant Roy Whitaker, for second-degree murder, concealing criminal evidence, and falsifying public records. The room fell silent. The prosecution presented first. Harold Keene stood, his voice steady, resonant with a lifetime's pursuit of this case. Your Honor, this is not a new case, but an old wound unearthed. For 47 years, Prescott believed Emily Sanders died in an accident, but science, justice, and human conscience have proven otherwise. He opened a slideshow, images of the unearthed Ford Galaxy, the silver necklace, topographic maps, DNA results, the Caterpillar excavator, and Whitaker's forged signature. Each image drew gasps from the gallery. When he described the covering soil with excavator oil matching PD's 1973 construction batch, some elderly spectators bowed their heads. A woman cried, Emily's niece. When Karen was called as an investigative witness, she spoke slowly, each word deliberate. We found the car buried under Prescott PD's municipal soil. Every piece of physical, biological, and witness evidence points to one man, Roy Whitaker. He had the authority, the means, and the motive to conceal. Harold Keene asked, what allowed this case to stay buried for so long? Karen replied, not a lack of evidence, but because the person holding the evidence was the perpetrator. The defense attorney stood, voice trembling slightly. Your Honor, the defendant admits partial responsibility, but he had no intent to kill. This was an accident during a struggle, not premeditated murder. Judge Mendel nodded, signaling Roy Whitaker to speak. He stood, his frail body trembling. The light illuminated his gaunt, aged face, but his eyes held a strange calm, as if he'd stopped running. I have nothing to say but the truth, he began, his voice hoarse and slow. That night, I pushed her. I didn't mean to kill. But when I saw the blood, I knew my career was over. I was scared. I thought I was protecting my reputation, the Whitaker name. But I killed a person and myself from that moment on. He paused, his gaze drifting to the courtroom where Emily's photo sat on the evidence table. I lived 47 years with that guilt. Every morning, washing my face, I saw myself in the mirror and wondered why the earth hadn't spoken. Now it has. A brief silence enveloped the room. The sound of a pen dropping echoed sharply. Judge Mendel jotted notes, then asked tersely, does the defendant plead guilty to the charges? Whitaker bowed his head. I plead guilty. To all of them. The trial continued 2 more days for forensic experts and past witnesses. Daniel Ricks, Mark Heller, Cynthia Hale. Each testimony nailed the 1973 timeline tighter, the police car by the lake, the stop diving order, the altered typed report. No room remained for doubt. On the afternoon of April 6, 2021, Judge Mendel delivered the verdict. Her voice rang clear across the wooden room. The Arizona State Court finds defendant Roy Whitaker guilty of second-degree murder, concealing criminal evidence, and falsifying public records. Considering his age, health, and voluntary guilty plea, the court sentences him to 25 years in prison, with no parole for the first 10 years. Karen closed her eyes briefly at the number. 25 years, he'd likely die in prison. But for Emily Sanders, it was the first time in nearly half a century that justice took tangible form. As police escorted Whitaker from the courtroom, he paused, turning to Karen. Thank you, he said softly, his voice faltering. You stopped me from seeing her by the lake every night in my dreams." Karen didn't respond. She watched, her gaze cold, but no longer angry. In that moment, she realized the man before her had been punished for 47 years by his own memories. Outside, Prescott's sky was clear, reporters crowding the courthouse steps. The click of cameras filled the air, and the Prescott Daily Courier's electronic headline blazed, "Arizona 1973 Cold Case Solved. Arrest Shocks Community." Beneath the subheading, a small caption read, "Justice delayed, but finally delivered." That evening, Karen drove out of Prescott, heading south on 89A. The sun had set behind the hills, an orange glow blanketing the mirror-like Watson Lake. She stopped by the roadside, opened her window, and let the dry desert wind blow through. Under the twilight, the lake shimmered, once the hiding place of a car and a secret, now reflecting only the wide-open sky. For the first time in months, Karen could breathe deeply. Behind her, in the small town settling into sleep, church bells rang steadily, signaling a new day. And with that, Arizona closed one of its longest cold cases, not with the wail of police sirens, but with the heavy silence of justice restored. The story of Emily Sanders' case is not just the tragedy of a young girl buried under Arizona's dry earth, but a mirror for today's American society, where justice, though late, can still be reclaimed if people relentlessly seek the truth. For 47 years, Prescott believed Emily died in an accident. They trusted a report signed by the face of the law. Roy Whitaker, the sheriff revered by the town, but that same man exploited that trust to conceal his guilt. The story reminds us that in any system, blind faith cannot replace transparency and independent oversight. In modern America, where citizens increasingly demand accountability and clarity from public institutions, the Emily Sanders case serves as a warning. Justice cannot rely solely on titles or reputations. It must be verified by evidence, science, and the courage to speak the truth. Figures like Karen Fields and Lena Ward represent a new generation of Americans, those who believe in the power of technology, integrity, and professional ethics. They didn't just solve a case. They proved that no matter how deeply the past is buried, it can be unearthed through persistence and responsibility. The lesson for every American today is this: never let silence become complicity. If you see wrong, speak up. If you hold power, use it to protect the truth, not to hide mistakes. As the final line of the case report states, after 47 years, Arizona's dry earth has given back what man tried to bury. And that is what every free society must remember. Justice may be delayed, but it never vanishes. If you believe justice never sleeps and truth will always rise, hit the subscribe button to join us in exploring more cold cases brought to light from the shadows. Thank you for following Emily Sanders' story. See you in the next video, where another layer of America's dust will be brushed away to reveal a forgotten truth.